G'day and welcome to this live session where we're looking at drawing problems. What's the biggest problem you feel you face in your drawing? And if you join us during the live chat, you can tell us and you can ask me. And if I have any thoughts that I think might be helpful, I will give them to you. And if you're watching this afterwards, well, there's always a lot of overlap with what we have in common, issues we have. So I'm hoping that that some of the things raised and therefore perhaps some of the things I say could be helpful and relevant to you. So g'day. We have one person joining so far. Whoever you are, let me know. Let me know where in the world you're watching from. And if you have a drawing question, a drawing issue, a drawing problem, I was thinking about this myself, earlier. And I have that to show you, to talk about what I think my drawing problems, perhaps my biggest drawing problem issue was, and how I got around it. But before I do that, I was clearing up some things that have been packed away for so long, maybe decades. And I found some drawings that I did when I was 16. So I thought I'd show you some of them. So this is back when I was in high school. So this is what the 16-year-old Stephen Travers Art was producing. There you go. Yeah, and here's another one. See if you can spot the theme. And here's another one. So these are amongst the first things I was drawing at the age of 16. And here's something a bit different in ink. There you go. Look at that. I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is actually from a photo of a German dreadnought. Yes, they're battleships. I think they're pictures of a German dreadnought that's actually sinking at Scapa Flow after the war, and I've just added an explosion to it to make it look more dramatic. There's another one. And for something, I don't know what I was doing this day, but so I think that might have actually been a little bit earlier. That might have been the year before, I think. But yeah. So that's what I was doing. Oh, look here, I've the one that was in ink. I've made that in color too. So that's where Stephen Travers Art started in 1974. So I know most of you weren't alive then, so you don't need to tell me. And I know that some of you are thinking my parents weren't alive then, and that's okay. But yeah, what questions? What questions do you have? Actually, there is one more that's very different, and it's one I quite like, but I'll show it to you later. I think it's the best one of, and I can vaguely remember painting it now that I see it, but I'll show it to you a bit later. So do any of the 12 people watching now have a drawing issue or problem that you either face, or maybe you have faced, but you think you've worked through it, that you could share with us on the chat? As I said, I'll chip in with something if no one says anything. But yeah. Well, I'll start with with what I think, for me, the biggest issue in my drawing development. I just realized that this screen isn't centered. There you are. That's better. So for me, I think my biggest problem is that I get very locked into ways of doing things that then start to feel safe. And I find it very hard to push past that. Now, you might think, oh no, that's not how it happens, because I've actually, in some videos recently, I've actually talked about how my drawings have progressed quite a lot, and how I've changed and developed my style because I've been trying new things and pushed to new things. But that's actually not like me. That's not my personality. And it's also not my prior experience in drawing. as I just said, what were the things I was drawing? Well, over and over again, I was drawing the same things when I was 16. So, and then I would sort of be thinking, oh well, I can draw ships, battleships, but I can't draw people or other things. And so then I would stick with the things I felt that I could draw. And so, I would very quickly, for no logical reason, divide things up into what I could and couldn't do, and that included drawing. And so that then very much narrowed what I did, but also how I did it, because it also made me, if I felt something had worked out, looked okay, then I felt like I had to keep doing it that way, or intensify doing things that way, and not try new things. And while that may have led to at least some drawings looking reasonable, because I was fairly intensely drawing the same thing over and over again in the same way with the same medium, with pencil, not a dark enough pencil, because I'm not sure whether at this age I really knew about pencils. Maybe I did by 16, because that looks like it's a 4B, and I wouldn't have had a 4B unless I'd actually gone to a shop and bought one. But I was well and truly in high school. Hi there, Milkshake. I was well and truly in high school before, several years in. I might have been 14, 15, before I realized that pencils came in different shades even, because you don't know what you don't know. And I would just pick up a pencil I found at home, and I'd be looking at some of the drawings that some of the other people in the art class were doing and thinking, oh, amazing darks. How did they get the pencils so dark? And of course they did that by using a 4B or a 5B or a 6B. And I had a 3H, but I didn't realize I had an H. I didn't realize there were H's and B's and there were different. I just thought you bought lead pencils, and maybe some of them just happened to be a bit darker than others. So I had no idea. So we don't know. I mean, it's almost embarrassing now, but I'm not embarrassed, because we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes what we don't know is one of our biggest problems, and it holds us back. And so, anyone want to cough up on the live chat with a problem that you've got drawing, or something that you struggle with? But if not, just tell me where you're watching from. It's just nice to get, hi there, Sophie, except of course it's 8:38 p.m. Sunday night here. So Owen, thank you, Owen Ramos. Let me know, Owen, where you're watching from. That would be great. I've got a problem with looking and adding details, especially shops and tables and buildings, but also removing details on faraway objects. Okay, so there's kind of two drawing issues here. There's the problem of details, and there's the problem of distance, creating the sense of distance. So we'll look at in the Philippines. Great. So we'll look at the second half first, removing details on faraway objects. In my experience, the best way to do that is to not draw the faraway objects too soon, because we want to, in most cases, depends a bit on your drawing style, but we normally want to help give a sense of distance by drawing far away things less clearly, and reducing the detail, reducing the heaviness of the line, reducing the sharpness of the edges. These are all ways we can create the effect of distance on a two-dimensional sheet of paper. Hi there, Shishir. But it's a relative thing. It's distance things that are in less detail compared to the closest things. And if we haven't drawn the closest things, then we don't have a sense of what we're drawing in less detail too, if that makes sense. So that's the first thing I'd say. Make sure that you draw the closer parts first, or at the very least, the mid parts. Now, I often find with street scenes, and so it's interesting that you've got a street scene for the first one. If I'm drawing a street scene that is shops and the street, and maybe things high behind, maybe buildings further away, or just trees or whatever, or the distance may be further along the street rather than behind the building, the main thing or whatever's closest. So with streets, you've often got a lot of clutter in the foreground. So you've got the building, but in front of the building on the ground, you've probably got people going past. There could be table and chairs outside. There could be bus stops. There's lights, traffic lights, street signs, street lights, all these sorts of things, delivery boxes, cars parked on the street, and so forth. And all of those things can be really tricky, quite apart from, I mean, mind you, I think tables and chairs are very hard. Like, I always hate it when there's a cafe to draw with table and chairs outside, because the hardest things to get right are the things that we have a strong sense of scale with, because we interact with them a lot. And so people, if we get the scale wrong with our figures, they don't look right, because we have a sense of the scale of a person that's stronger than, say, the scale of a stack of boxes or of a garbage bin in the street. And look, if you think you're going to enjoy this, please hit the like button for me. That would be helpful. But tables and chairs, again, because we as people interact with them, we have a fairly strong intuitive sense of how large or small they are, and the scale they would be in front of a building and with doors and windows and people walking past. So you often, in drawings of streets, end up seeing tables and chairs that, even if the tables and chairs look good, as in they look real, they're either too large or too small in relation to either the doors and windows of the building or people walking past or people trying to sit in them. So look, the only way around that is to be aware that this is an issue and to work really hard at doing it. And I would say the best way, Owen, to do it is to concentrate on that. So if you like drawing street scenes and you recognize the fact that there's going to be lots of tables and chairs, then just draw that part of the drawing over and over again. Don't put time into doing the whole scene when you may not have the same skill level for the tables and chairs. Just do drawings of not only the tables and chairs, but the little bit that's behind them. And that way you can fast track your improvement. Because if it takes you 10 minutes to do the table and chairs and the things behind them, and then you can look at it and work out, has it worked? Has it not worked? Then you can do it again using what you've just learned, and you can do it again. And in 30 minutes of drawing, you've practiced the part you stumble over, the tables and chairs, 3 times. But if you do the whole drawing, you've practiced once, and you may not have time to draw anymore. And you haven't, you might be aware perhaps the issues with that one that you've done in 30 minutes. And now you're frustrated because they've spoilt the drawing, because you can tell they're not right, but you don't have time to do anything else. So this is the beauty of concentrating on just drawing the elements when you have a particularly weak element, just concentrating on drawing that part over and over again in your drawing session. And once we get over the fact that we're learning to draw, we're not creating artworks, then we don't need to sort of feel that we're going to walk away with a drawing, because we're far better off using a 20-minute session, 30, 40, 60-minute session to really work on a weak area so that it becomes stronger, than producing, let's be honest, a poor artwork. Because at some point soon, I'll be producing better artworks, and then decent artworks, and then amazing artworks, because the table and chairs are going to be wonderful, because I've practiced them to bring so much, and that brings them up to speed with the areas that I'm already stronger in. And so does that make sense? And I hope that's helpful. KM, hello, translating the angles from photo to paper. I use the dot placement you suggest, compare the dots in the photos, but I still managed to get the angles wrong, and I checked them several times. That's great, Owen. I hope you've hit the like button then. KM, what do I suggest? Look, it could be that for you, the dot system just isn't going to work so well. I mean, this is a system that I've found works well. What I do first, though, is I usually place a dot. And like sometimes what I end up doing with the video is a bit different to what I do if I'm just drawing. But what I would normally do first is I place the dot just by eyesight, just by eyeballing, because that's the skill I really want to develop. I really want to develop just being able to see it and accurately position the dot. And so I put the dot where I think the angle of the line will go. And then I just look at it and I imagine a line there. Now, I've got a pretty good imagination, so that helps. I imagine the line there, and then looking at my imagination line, I look at the reference again, and then I see if I think it's going to be right. And if thanks there, Ali, glad you like the haircut. And if I think the angle's looking okay, then I will then measure it, or I might then put a second dot above or below, or I might just think, I think it's going to be a bit higher or a bit lower, and then I might use my angled pen and slide across to see. So I find personally that works well, and then that tells me if my kind of just visual observation estimation is accurate or not. Because what I find personally, and so therefore this is probably true for most of us, we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. So we may make a different mistake, but we each will tend to do the same mistake. So if we tend to underestimate the angle, we will always tend to underestimate the angle. So if I'm aware of that, then I can actually learn to kind of like add a little bit up, and that can be more accurate. So yeah, you know, maybe KM don't fuss so much with the dots and the sliding pen. The other thing you can do, and this is going back to what I was talking about with Owen with the tables and chairs, but in a different context, in a very different context, and that's get some reference photos that have the sorts of subjects you like to draw, and it sounds like there's probably buildings involved in that, and just work at drawing basically the box of the building so that you actually draw the perspective angle, and then you check the angle that you've drawn. So you're not worrying about the detail. You in other words, you're working on a specific area, on a specific skill, the skill of seeing what's happening and with the angles, and then estimating it in drawing your line. Sometimes I don't do this all the time, but particularly if it's sort of an angle that is really important. Sometimes I'll actually get my pen and I'll go across to the reference photo and I'll just like, I won't hit the paper, but I'll just like get some muscle memory of what that angle feels like with my arm and hand and wrist in the drawing position. And, you know, again, that can be helpful. And while, yes, there are times where we can't do that when we're drawing, particularly if we're on location, it builds our knowledge of what certain angles feel like. It builds our knowledge of when we see an angle, what it feels like to have our hand, our arm, our wrist, whatever, in the right positions to draw it. And so it all builds up. But if we just, good morning, Ian, but if we just work on that particular skill without the overhead of drawing, g'day Randy, oh, you made it, without drawing the whole scene, then that saves a lot of time, and it lets us work intensely on the area that's weak. Because as I said before, what's the point of finishing a whole drawing if we know there's some element that we're not going to get right, or is probably going to be weaker? Why not just draw that weak area over and over again until we get it right? It doesn't mean we can't do whole drawings, but just do drawings without tables and chairs outside the cafe. Like, do scenes that we can, because it is, let's face it, it's it's very motivating to do some nice drawings sometimes, to have a chance of the whole thing working out. So I'm not saying we never try and do a drawing that can look okay, but when we're pushing into new areas, if we come across things that we struggle with to have look right, then rather than doing drawing after drawing that has an obvious weak spot that kind of spoils it, work on that weak spot. Don't avoid it. If we avoid it, well, we'll never get on top of it. And there are things I can, I worked at cars because I just didn't care about cars enough to pay enough attention to them to have built up a good memory or good imagination. So I had to really learn what parts of a car in a reference or in front of me do I have to look at and kind of measure and get a sense, and where do I start to draw them? What's the most accurate way of drawing them? And just drawing cars is a good way to fast track that, rather than doing a nice streetscape with a, embarrassing looking car in the front. Just have 10 sheets of scrap paper and just draw car after car after car. And if we do it in a thoughtful, mere repetition won't lead to improvement. But if after every drawing of a car I critique it, I work out, well, why isn't this car looking like a car? Why is it looking like it's not really on the ground, or that it's smashed up or twisted or somehow? Then I know in the next car what I need to work on a little more closely. And eventually my cars start to look, I was going to say human, but they start to look car-like. And that's what we want. So it's a way of fast tracking what we're doing, and letting us do some drawings where the drawing looks good, because we kind of limit it to things that we are fairly reasonable at, have a good chance at, but we still work on the skills that we, of observation and of drawing and of all of that, working out strategies of drawing things, all the things that have to happen before the pen hits the paper, and then all the pen hitting the paper things. So yeah, we double down on those things. That's my thought with that. So if that was helpful and you haven't hit the like button, please do it now. So any questions, any more questions of things that you struggle with in drawing that you'd like my thoughts for? They can be technical things, or they can be bigger picture things. So it could be I can't draw a straight line, or it could be my perfectionism means I'm scared to start, and anything in between. That would be good. That's great, KM. Glad that was helpful. So I'll show you while I'm waiting for another question, I'll show you the other artwork from when I was 16 that I found this afternoon in a folder. And I worked out, I was telling my wife, I worked out why they were all together in this folder. It goes back to when I was in school that year, and I was doing art at school. And I used to never actually do any painting in class or drawing, because I didn't think I was any good, and I felt everybody else was better, and I was just embarrassed to look like I wasn't as good as everyone else. And so at the end of the year, the teacher had nothing to give me a mark with, and she said, well, have you done anything at home? Just bring in things that you've done at home. And so I put all these in a folder, and I took them in for her to mark, instead of having done nothing at school. Anyway, here we have a Spitfire. So yeah, that's what the 16-year-old Stephen Travers was doing. I never really drew planes. I think they're probably harder to draw than battleships. If you were here earlier, I was showing I have a whole lot of these drawings of battleships that I did when I was 16. But that's why they were all together, because I'd put them all together in a folder to take to school. And when I brought them home, I just obviously left them in a folder, and the folders just got put with things. We have a question, Michaela. How does one deal with wanting to be realistic and capture all the detail, but knowing that you shouldn't get caught in all the small points and having to look at the bigger picture? This is in the context of painting. Okay, look, it's really the same as in drawing. and I did paint for 10 years before I drew. My drawing is only really since 1918, 2018. And I painted in oils exclusively for 10 years before that. How do we deal with it? Look, I found with painting, the biggest struggle was that I couldn't cope with the, if you like, the underpainting stage. I wanted something to be looking finished from the word go. And so, if the underpainting just looked like it was nothing, and it wasn't like it was a bad painting, and my head would start saying, this is hopeless, this isn't worth the time. And then I'd try and paint for the way I painted with oils. I would try and paint too much and end up just, everything would just blend in together and look terrible. So it's really a question of patience with the outcome that we want, and the strengths and limitations of the medium we're using. We have to, you're very aware of the problem, which I think is always a great strength. The biggest problems are the ones that we don't realize we have. And that's why I often say that the lack of observational skills for drawing is such a problem, because most people don't think they have it. Most people think, no, I can see it, I can't draw it. And I would almost bet the house on that, no, actually, most of the problems with what you've drawn is that you haven't seen enough to draw it well, because the seeing it in the way we need to see it to draw it is actually the more difficult skill than the technical skill of then putting the lines in those places. And I would still swear by that. But we think we know how to look at something, and we do for everyday life, but we don't appreciate the fact that how we have to see something and what we have to look for and how much we have to look for it in order to draw it well is different to how I look at something in everyday life to use that get by everyday life stuff. And so it's the unrecognized problem that's the real problem. So, Michaela, I guess I'm saying you're more ahead than you think, because you're aware of it. And one of the biggest problems is knowing when to stop. But I think, yeah, and that's, again, it's the same with drawing and with painting. Only in some ways there's more ways we can mess up with the painting. We can end up putting, I guess with a drawing, we can just end up putting ink in all the spaces that we should have left white, or we put value on areas that should have been very light, and we make them dark or mid. And so we lose the contrast, we lose the extremes that often create the rhythm, the visual rhythm of how a drawing or a painting looks. With painting, we can end up putting too many highlights over too broad an area. It's not just the subject matter that's the problem. It's also things such as where we put. I mean, we have with painting, and certainly for the big tree canopies that I used to paint, we can have the problem of the value, the light and dark. So we put too many lights, or it can be too many darks, but usually it's too many lights, too many highlights. But maybe even more common than that is that we can go too strong, too deep with the color, and that can also flatten something and make it look garish and unnatural. I found for me the biggest problem with when I was painting Michaela was restraining the really kind of and it's partly because Australian trees, the greens are so drab, they're not, there's no bright greens, or very few bright greens in the Australian bush. And so really showing restraint with the greeny greens for just a few highlight points most of the time. And so, yeah, there are lots of ways we can go too far. And sometimes it was like the last you could spend like 15 hours doing a painting, And it's only in the last kind of 30 minutes when you kind of do the highlightingest highlights, and you do the few little dashes of bright color, suddenly the painting starts singing. I mean, it just comes alive, almost bursts suddenly into life. But if you go too far, you lose it. If you do too much. So knowing, like restraining with the paintbrush. Now, yeah, it's paint, so you can paint over it, but yeah. But like you learn it. It's a skill. So yeah, just keep at it. And when you've gone too much, I mean, you haven't said whether you're watercolor or oils. If you go too much with oils, you can wipe it off, and the next day you get a clean slate. If it's watercolor, I guess you've got to start again. But show restraint. Or the other thing, I don't know how large you're painting. The other thing is reduce back to a smaller scale, because in most cases, it's easier to learn the skills on a small scale, and that may be helpful. Me too, to know. I'm actually thinking about going tomorrow. What's U3? Oh, right. Okay. Yep. Tomorrow. What should I start with, since I've done nothing since April? I would start with something you're fairly comfortable with. Me too. I would choose a subject that you enjoy, and something you enjoy to look at, and something you know well, and make sure you have a reference to take. So maybe a nice reference of a kitten, and and draw that. Yeah. So start in your comfort zone. I mean, animals can be difficult because they've got fur, and hair is not an easy subject. But things we love to look at are always a bit easier to draw as well, because we've done a lot more observation. I love battleships. and that's just partly because Dad had books and magazines on the war, and so it was just something I was able to look at and liked. Eucalyptus leaves do have a lot of blues and greys as well. Ian, I don't know whether you saw this, since you brought up blues and greys and colors. This was one of my earlier paintings. I don't know whether you saw this last time, but it was sort of looking through the bush with some, late in the day, it was winter, so it was kind of a weak light, and you can see there's some Banksias here, and there are some dead Banksias up here, and there's some closer eucalypts here that were very much sort of bluey greeny, and then there were lots of other things, and there was just lots of indistinct light scattering. So I really like this painting, and so I never sold it. I never put it in an exhibition. Instead, I just stuck it on the wall above the TV, and if the house is burning down, it may be the one thing I go to grab. Yes, yeah. But colour is another thing again. But certainly for the Australian bush, showing restraint with the colour. And I see lots of, when I go to art shows, which I like doing, I see lots and lots of Australian bush scenes where the colours are just too bright. Yeah, and it's just something we need to realise. Michaela, it's like a harmony, having to know the mix of strength and depth. Yeah, and look, again, that comes from practice. And if I feel I need practice in it, again, if I paint rather small size, talking more about painting than drawing, if I paint in small size, small scale, then I can really experiment with mixing the colors. And the thing I found, I mean, I don't know how experienced you are, Michaela, but the thing for me, because I was self-taught with the painting and the oils, the thing I found really helpful was simply separating all the colors in my mind or on the table into cool and warm undertones, because and then in my reference, working out which parts are warm and which parts are cool. And I found that incredibly, when I realized that that's the way it worked, it was amazing how much it sped up my ability to not just paint, but to mix colors. Because generally, you want to mix cool with cool and warm with warm. You can mix them together, and that creates a different effect. But I found that really helpful, and particularly for my, what I used to call my neutrals, my kind of grey purpley colors for those, which is a lot of, well, it was a lot of my paintings, a lot of my eucalypts where the highlights weren't. And so I found that incredibly helpful to divide my big canopies into, well, these parts are kind of warm, neutral undertones, and these parts are cool, neutral undertones. And, I would often start by just dividing basically the tree canopy over the entire canvas into warm and cool, and paint that as a starting point, or like a silhouette with the sky behind. Michaela, I do digital art, but I'm learning. Right. Okay. Yep. Well, I know nothing about digital art, but I imagine awareness of warm and cool colors is certainly helpful. Owen, can you give advice in learning composition? Not much people seem to know. Yeah, yes, I haven't done it. I've got a couple of videos on composition. It's sort of not an easy thing to do. I mean, I could show lots of references and say why I think this is a good composition. I guess I could do a video where I get quite large photos and then I kind of crop them to say, well, I would change this to like this. I'd cut this out, change this out, because I think it works better. I suppose I could do that, and that might be helpful. When we think of composition, I think we often think of still life and arranging the things. And I've never really painted still life, although I did come across, when I was sorting down the back today, a still life that I began, which I thought, oh, that looks quite good. It's not accessible. I can't at the moment. I can't show you, but of course, composition is not just where we arrange subjects. Composition is how we choose what's in a scene, which is why cropping is so important. Never get a drawing, never get a photo and just think, oh, I'll draw it. Always consider the composition. Always consider, can I shave a bit off here, a bit off there? And it's not just the objects, but it's also the value. And if we're painting or using color, pastels or something, it's the color as well. So it's the balance of all of these things. And sometimes we need things to have a bit of breathing space around them so that we can kind of see them, appreciate them. So sometimes there are some things we don't want to have too close to an edge, because then they kind of blend with the edge and we really don't see them. But something in the dead center, if it's too prominent, often doesn't work very well, because it kind of like just fixates the vision and there's no kind of movement. I think my personal thing, I think good composition is composition that if you're walking past, the composition, reaches out, grabs you by the throat and pulls you into the picture and forces you to kind of track around it and to look at the whole thing. It involves you in the scene, whether you want to be involved or not. And so I think that's why I've done a few drawings, and if you've seen any recent videos, you'd have seen some of these of like pathways and tracks and staircases and things, because that's a compositional device to draw people in, because we go on a journey, we go up the stairs, we go along the path, or there's a path going around a corner and we kind of go as far as we can and then we wonder what's around. But also strong darks and lights next to each other draw the eye as well. So it's not just what the subject is, it's the way it's presented. And again, things that are drawn with clarity and detail draw the eye more than things that are not quite so, blah, blah, blah. So by controlling all these things, we can actually, we can help someone to stay looking at our drawing, to actually get involved in the scene, not just because, oh, it's a kitten, I like kittens, or it's the Musée du Louvre, there's a lot of detail there. Detail can attract attention. It gives lots of things to look at, or it can be overwhelming and we bounce off it. It's almost like a armor that we can't get through, because it's like it's so big and it's all the same that we just can't see anything, and so we actually don't engage. So these are all things to think about with composition when we draw. And of course, remember, when we have a photo, we can manipulate these things. We don't have to try and draw what's in the photo. And some of the first couple of questions were connected with detail and knowing when to reduce the detail that we see in the reference and to sort of ease off, because creating areas of intensity and then less intensity, whether it's the value, whether it's the amount of line work, whether it's the detail that we show, whatever, whether it's a change of subject matter, it is also a way of helping people to navigate around, because the changes create finite things that we can then focus on and then be led to another one. So yeah, all of these are compositional things. It's way more than arranging an apple, 2 oranges, a banana, and a teapot on a tablecloth. I don't know. Is that helpful, Owen? Thanks, Ian. Not sure about a kitten. Adults have had enough. Yeah. Well, it's just something that you like me to. That's what I suggest. And if you've got some items around the house, why not take a photo on your phone and do that? And it's probably best to keep it something simpler, rather than if it's been a while since you've drawn, and yeah, because you want to have a chance of doing it well. So, but I would say, have at least 3 or 4 different things, and then see how you feel when you get there. Or you might start one and then change to another one. But there's nothing quite as encouraging to push on as doing quite well at something. So we always want to set ourselves up to have a chance, at least, of doing something that we're happy with. And even if we're just working on a skill development, even if we're working on, say, drawing trees, so I just draw tree after tree after tree, still choose it. Don't start with the most difficult tree. Start with one that doesn't have as many things to have to think about all at once. And then as I start to draw trees like that more comfortably, more easily, then I can start to add, okay, well, what if it's a different type of tree? What if it's a pine tree or a palm tree? Once I've began to sort of get my head around reasonable oak trees, then I can start to look at now applying whatever principles in tree drawing oak trees that have worked for me. I can look at applying those to others. Okay, Michaela, well, I have to practice it more. Then I only started going back to having color in my drawings and trying to paint. Yeah, well, yeah, have fun. Don't try and do too much at once. And I think that includes size. I probably tried painting too big too early, and you can just end up with a lot of big paintings that take you a long time that have problems. So, yeah. It's like 3 years, and I've barely, if not at all, colored my drawings. Yeah. Well, yeah. Start. Because when we start, we give ourselves focus. And again, it's always look at our work and say, well, what would I do differently? Now, the problem with paintings with oil painting is that you can never, you can continually keep painting over it. And I look at that one that I showed you, and there are some areas I think, I could do this, I could do that. I could tweak this, I could tweak that. That looks a little bit dull, a little bit unfinished down there compared to over there. But, that's part of it too. Learning to say, yeah, it's time to move on to the next one. The apopheniac. I have no idea what that means, but it looks like it's formed from a couple of Greek root words. Any advice for simplifying your drawing when drawing something with overwhelming detail? I have a whole playlist on that. Have you seen that playlist? Um, um, so yeah, I mean, have I got advice on that? Oh, I'd like to think that's possibly a strength of mine. um, um, I think the biggest challenge is that we have to disconnect the part of our brain that sees the detail and that knows what's there. I think that's the biggest challenge. Sorry, you're going to get seasick if I do this. Yeah, I can't do that. I can't balance it on my knee. I mean, I really found it was drawing trees that kind of led me into the way of thinking that for me has worked really well. And then from that, I could expand out to other things. And it came from painting the trees. Not so much the paintings of trees I did like the one I just showed you, where you kind of could see some individual leaves, but really enormous canopies of trees, 50 meters across and, well, maybe that long, maybe that big. And so even though you could kind of see the leaves, or thought at least you could see the leaves, to not try and paint the leaves, but to paint the overall feel. So I think leaves were a great subject for helping me to realize the only way I can do this, the only way I can represent this, so it works for drawing too. The only way I can represent this is to stop seeing all the detail and kind of almost like just look at it quickly and say, what's the effect of what I see? What actually kind of how does it look when you're not seeing the detail? But probably one of the key things is that there is some part that you draw in detail. You just don't do too much of it, but you draw some part in a place and in a way that it's really quite noticeable. Actually, I'll show you. There's a painting on the wall here, a drawing on the wall here. It's one of my field of flower paintings. My wife, I did this for my wife. She liked this. So, but you can see, so this is a great example of drawing the effect of detail, not the detail, but you still end up drawing some detail. So, yeah, this flower and these flowers down here, where we have these daisy-like flowers, and down the bottom too, we have these daisy-like flowers silhouetted against the dark. And I manipulated the reference to I sort of moved some of the darks so that they showed up some of the flowers more. When we look at this, though, we really see this flower. It's not dead center, but it's sort of, they're kind of in the center. And this dark patch draws the eye with all the light around it, and the kind of detail of the petals that we can see really easily. And that's the thing, you see, I made some of the flowers really easy to see, and also some of the stems and some of the leaves. But what happens is, as we then move out, I stop drawing the detail, and just getting rid of that reflection. I stop drawing the detail and I start to draw the effect of the detail. I start to do, when we get up here, the suggestions of leaves, of stalks, but I leave a lot of more and more paper is left without any marks, and the marks that are on it get lighter and lighter. So I actually used a couple of different pens here. I would have used maybe even probably just a 0.3, and then a 0.2, and then a 0.1 up the very top, because that also helps give this sense of closer and further away. So, and then at the top, Now this, from memory, this was in the reference. It was darker, the bits that were behind. But you can see I've silhouetted some flowers, but and that also means that when we look up the back, we can see what they are really, but they're not drawn as clearly, as carefully as the ones down the front. And so therefore they do have a sense of being further away. So so if you saw the photo, you think, oh, you couldn't possibly draw that, it's overwhelming. But I mean, I have a video. If you look at my Drawing the Effect of Detail playlist, there's I think there's about 60, 70 videos on it. This is one of them. My best performing video is similar to this. I don't think the drawing is as good as this one, but that video's had, you know, between 1.6 and 1.7 million views, so it's it did a lot better. But clearly the problem and perhaps this solution resonated with people. So, but I've got drawings with crowds of people, and it's the same principle, whether it's flowers or people, whether it's trees, whether it's brickwork, any drawing subject where there's overwhelming detail. There is a way we can apply that to that. And if you want, you can just, you know, look through that playlist of mine, because you'll see that way of thinking applied to a lot of different, very different subjects. I'm in this room, me too. Apophenia, seeing patterns everywhere. Thank you for looking that up, Ian. Me too's saying still having issues with connecting. I'm in this room for two reasons. One, it's actually warmer. The aircon's in this room, but it's closer to the router, so maybe I would get through. The weather is perhaps a little more sympathetic. The ether is not so stirred up tonight. But I just thought, oh look, you know, yeah, my wife has very nicely left the room, and yeah. But if I sit here and she needs to move about, she's behind the screen, so you don't see her. So that's okay. Lily, hi Lily. I was running. Please, Lily, call me Stephen. Haven't been called Mr. Travis since I left the classroom in 1982. I was wondering if you would approach an ink drawing differently if you plan to color or shade over it afterwards, and if so, what would you do differently? What would I do differently? Look, I have limited experience in this, and it's one of the things I keep planning to do, and then I just keep doing more of what I've always done. But when I first did the drawings, the buildings and stuff, I did them in pencil. And at one stage, I did take a whole lot of them to a printer and got some copies done on cardboard, and I watercolored over the pencil. And I thought they turned out very well. They're in the room next to me, but they might take me, you know, a minute to find. So maybe for another live session, I can have them ready and just show. But it all depends on you, on like how much, how to put this, what you want to be the dominant medium. Do you want it to, and like how much do you want to be doing? So let's say we're going to put watercolor over a pencil drawing. The issue is how many different colors, watercolors, do you want to use for different values and different shades, and or how much do you want that to be created by the graphite, by the pencil underneath? So do you want to do lots of hatching and value with the pencil, which means you can kind of get a better effect with less variation in the paint. Or you might want to simplify the line drawing to a bare minimum, to a bare skeleton, if you like, and then spend more time with the paint, so creating all the shade and shadow with paint and none of it with hatching. So it really does depend on the feel that you want your finished drawings to have. But I think it's certainly helpful to be aware. When I did the drawings, I had no intention of doing anything with color with them. So they were what they were. But I was kind of surprised. I sold quite a lot of them. I was quite surprised how nicely they turned out. Yeah. So, yeah. But it would be more helpful if you knew before you did the drawing. I mean, one of the reasons I started drawing freehand in ink was because in 2020 we had this trip booked to Europe that was cancelled because of COVID. But I wanted to be able to do some simple but freehand and quick line drawings with ink in the street that I could then use watercolor to. And the trip didn't happen, and neither did the watercolor. But I'm hoping to get to it still. Mitos. And can some of you tell me, like, Lily, where are you watching from? Mitos, where are you watching from? My problem with drawing is drawing itself. It's been almost a month. Would you have any advice of getting back to drawing? It depends on why you're not drawing. Like, maybe you've just been busy with other things, and other things count too. I mean, you could have 12 children and a wife and a demanding job, or you could be, a university student and it's getting close to exams or end of semester assignments. Or it could be that you've reached a point where you've kind of got yourself into a bit of a knot mentally and you're afraid of making mistakes, and that's paralyzed you. It kind of really depends on what's the problem. But whatever the problem is, and you can tell me more if you want, I certainly empathize with perfectionism and what it does to us. One of the other reasons, the other big reason I switched to drawing with pen was so that I could tackle perfectionism, because I thought if I stopped using a pencil, if I stopped having an eraser, then I have to kind of just move on. I can't keep. I found that it was ironic. I found that the better I became at drawing with pencil, the more demanding my mind came with what I could accept. And so as I got better, I demanded that every line be more and more perfect. And I saw more and more problems more easily and had to fix them. And it really reached the point I felt like, I remember one day thinking, I'm erasing more lines than I'm leaving. I'm spending more time fixing lines that aren't there at the end than lines at the end. And it just really took away all the joy, all the fun. And I thought, well, that's no good. And I could see that, like, I was in an unhealthy mindset. There's nothing wrong with having high standards, and there's nothing wrong with pushing ourselves. And there's nothing wrong if you want to do that and it works for you. But for me, and then I was putting off starting in case I made a mistake. And I thought, well, if I can't correct anything, then I've got to learn to both live with it, overcome it, and maybe change some of my drawing and thinking, strategizing techniques, and develop ways to give myself a chance of drawing it well, but particularly learn to overcome it and learn to push through it. And I've learned a lot of things like that from that. And I found that the eraser created the context for the perfectionism to live. And if I took away the opportunity to change anything at all once it was on the paper, I either stopped drawing completely, or I got over the fact that some lines, some marks aren't going to be in an ideal place. And that's okay. I can trust that further down the drawing process for that drawing, I'll make it look a bit better, or perhaps it won't even look as bad at the end anyway. And that's That's so often the case. I do have some videos on dealing with perfectionism, and I'm sure perfectionism is in the title or the thumbnail. And I also have some on dealing with mistakes. And by mistakes, I just mean marks that aren't in a helpful place. And that's both a mind game, and there are some technical things we can bear in mind, as well as developing drawing strategies. And by that I mean where we start, how we progress, how we, if you like, move our drawing into new areas on the paper that give us more chance of not making those mistakes. So, yeah, but whatever the issue is, getting back to Mitos, I would suggest set yourself up for success. So don't start a real big drawing. Start something small, and just to get your hand in. Small sheet of paper, small subject, something that you're comfortable with, something that you're happy to have a go at, and it doesn't feel like a big deal, and sort of get back in the saddle, as they say. That's what I would suggest. I'm falling behind here. Hang on. The apopheniac, it also means someone that sees patterns that aren't actually there, like looking at ink blots or the clouds and seeing a face. Oh dear. Gosh, honestly, if you draw trees and if you paint trees, you're forever ending up seeing faces in the bark of the tree or faces in the leaves. It's so terrible, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's not so bad if you've still got the paints there. And I've had to change things many a time to get rid of a nose or a mouth or an eye or something. But it's terrible if it's like you're at the exhibition when you think, there's a face, or you don't see it, but someone else sees it and they show you. Nico, yeah, a nice reason for me to procrastinate from the report that I have due tomorrow. Oh, well, sorry about that, Nico. Yeah. Randy, perfectionism seems to be my biggest issue. I tried pencil and there aren't enough erasers made, so I wanted doing to avoid erasing. How do I get past this? Well, just start. But the other thing is to say, and this might be easier to do if you're starting a new medium, such as ink, and you haven't particularly drawn in ink before, is say, well, I'm not actually drawing, I'm just playing around. I'm just learning. I'm not, it's a lot of the pressure comes from the fact that we think I'm doing an artwork, I'm doing a proper drawing. It's like sitting down the piano when we're learning to play the piano and feeling that I'm doing a performance. And when we're not, we're practicing, we're learning. We've got to have the same mindset, I think, when we're learning to draw, or when we're pushing into deeper skill territory or unfamiliar subjects. We've got to get away from this thought that I'm going to have an artwork at the end. I have to have an artwork at the end. And if I'm any good, I will. And if I don't, it means I'm hopeless and I'm wasting my time. No, it means I'm learning a skill. I'm learning a new thing, and I won't get it right. When people learn the piano, they hit wrong notes. Now, I haven't learned the piano, but I've got 4 children who have, and you hit wrong notes when you learn the piano. And you start with simpler things and you work on just a few skills. And this is why I say choose simple subjects on a small scale that you can concentrate just on a few things. Or if you learn the guitar, you don't learn 15 chords in the first lesson and then you try and play a song with 15 chords in it. You learn 2 chords and you just play a song that only has 2 chords in it, back and forth, or maybe 3 if there's an easy chord in there. And we have to do the drawing equivalent of that. Start small scale, not too many things to juggle. And then when we become comfortable with that, we can start to expand, and it's not so much that I can draw these and I can't draw those, but whatever I draw, I choose the simpler version. And if we have a subject that inspired us to draw, such as architecture, and seeing wonderful architectural drawings, it can be really hard to have the self-control to say, I'm going to start with a simple cottage and not the Musée du Louvre or the Palais Garnier or the, Schönbrunn or something. I'm going to start with a simple cottage and learn to do that well, because then those skills I can take, I'll learn them faster, better with a cottage. And I remember being in Paris thinking, oh, I'd love to draw the Louvre, but it's such an amazing building, but gosh, I'd be crazy to try. And I would have been, because I would have just spent time doing a bad drawing, and that would have discouraged me. And I've drawn it since, and it's been great to draw. But I couldn't have done that back then. So learning to pace ourselves, and that does work, Randy, with perfectionism, I think, so that we have a chance that there aren't too many things, because we do need to get some runs on the board. But to get out of the mindset I'm producing an artwork, and to get into the mindset I'm a student and I'm learning a skill. And this is going to sound like someone who's never played the piano having their first, second, third, fourth lesson, but over time it will improve. So g'day there, Dev. How are you? Arkansas, that's where you are. Welcome. Me too, not you. Dev, I love your work. Thank you. Inspires me very much, and thanks for sharing your valuable tips and advice with us. My pleasure. Please tell your friends about my channel, and if you haven't hit the like button tonight, please do. It always helps. But can I say, sharing the link with someone is about the most helpful thing you can do for me. So if you've got someone who draws, I don't mean spam your friends, but someone who would find it helpful, because if they then watch it, I think that works even better. Lily, got it. So I guess approach it with an intention. Are you in India, Dev? It sounds like an Indian name. I know I have a lot of. I think India is actually the country that I have the second most people who watch my videos in, after the USA. So I think it's the USA, then India. The Philippines is in the top 5. I think Australia is number 6. Okay. Lily, got it. So I guess approach it with an intention. You're in the USA. Great, Lily. So Sandia, I love ink and watercolor. Hope you would do some. Would love to see you do it. Well, I did show. Here's an ink drawing I did when I was 15, 16. I found these. If you missed it earlier, I found this folder with these just a few hours ago, with these drawings that I did when I was 16, and clearly I had a theme. Very much I had a theme. So when you're in a comfort zone, stay there. That's very much my personality. And here's a painting of that's the Nevada at Pearl Harbor, and then I painted that ink one at one stage. And then if you missed it, and there's even an aeroplane. That's probably the best painting, I think. That's what I was doing when I was 16. Sad case. All right. Epiphaniac, advice for when to use 1-point and 2-point perspective and how to find it. What makes a building 1-point and what makes a building 2-point? I have I think 3 perspective playlists. I think the first one has about 100 videos on it. One has 20, which I think is now 23, and one is a bit more specialized. But look, it depends how you draw. Like if we draw from things we see or from photos, we don't need to understand perspective at all. We just need to be able to learn to see what we see and draw it, because perspective is simply the fact that what we see changes when our viewing point changes. So if I'm looking at a building straight on and I just see the front, if it's a boxy building, that's 1 point perspective, because basically that building, I see the front and it all looks at right angles and everything. But if I walk around to the side, so I'm now looking at what was one end now becomes a corner, and the building comes out on two sides from that corner. Well, that's called 2 point perspective, because those diagonal lines that come off from each side now, if you were to get the top and the bottom line and join them up, there's two different points for that one building. In 1 point perspective, the building I look at from the front, the four corners all go back to a center point, but I can't see those lines because they're hidden behind the building. But if I move to the side, then I can now see two sides of the building, but I can see, and depending on the angle and how large the building is, the closest corner, the one I'm in front of looking at, and one end and the other end can actually, those ends can be, they haven't got to be the same size, but they're going to be quite a bit smaller than, and that just reflects the fact that when something's further away, it looks smaller. And so, and again, if I'm standing quite close to it, and it's going to look different to if I'm standing 10 feet away than if I stand 10 feet away and I kneel. It's going to shift the balance. The top angles are going to be steeper and the bottom angles aren't going to be as steep. If I lie on the ground and look up, it's going to be a very different effect, because the ground will stay straight and the top angles will be even more extreme. So perspective is just a word to describe that something looks different depending where we look at it from. And that's how we use the word perspective. His perspective on politics, my personal viewpoint on the politics. So that's all it means. And as I said, we don't even need to understand, but there are, because how something looks is a physical thing, that there's kind of a theory, there's physics of observation, I think might be one way to put it, that goes with it. And that can be helpful. Like, I think it's helpful to understand the theory, because then when I look at my reference or look at something in life, I know what I'm seeing. I understand it. And if that lets me see it more easily, more quickly, and that has to help me when I draw it. But it's not necessary. Now, if I draw from my imagination and I'm creating landscapes of buildings, then I think it's probably inescapable to understand perspective. Although I'd be very surprised if there wasn't some app that did it all for you. I don't do that, so I can't really kind of probably be very helpful there. But yeah, a building is 2 point when you're looking at it from a side, and so you can see two sides of it. The biggest problem, and actually I do, one of my perspective playlists is on just this topic, and that's the fact that look, I haven't seen them all, but I've seen quite a few perspective videos on YouTube. And the biggest problem with most of them, in fact, with every single one I've seen, I've never seen one that hasn't done this, is not what they tell you. It's what they don't tell you. They don't tell you all this really important stuff. And if you've struggled with perspective, if you've looked at perspective videos and then you've gone to draw and you can't relate the video that you thought you understood with life, and you end up thinking, I just must be stupid, I can't get it, everyone else seems to get it, I can't get it. Can I say this is for you? Because you're not the problem. The problem is the perspective video you've watched, because it's given you a very specific set of circumstances where it looks like this. You have a box diagram, you have a straight line, you have two vanishing points, and you might have you might have 2 buildings or even 3 buildings or even a bit of an artificial looking street, but everything is lined up parallel or at right angles. And when you do that, when those circumstances are met, then what happens in the video happens. But what the videos don't tell you is that if it's not like that, then it's not like that. So if the ground is uneven, if the buildings are, or if the ground is even, but the street goes around a corner, if the front of the building is curved, let alone if the street goes up and down and round a corner, it's different. It's not, I mean, what's in the video is still true, but it's not true the way it looks in the video. There's more to it than that. When the streets go up and down and around the corner, when the buildings aren't at right angles or the streets aren't at right angles, then it's more complex than that. But the videos don't tell you that there's more to it than this. And I actually think that a lot of people just watch a video on Perspective. They've seen that it's done really well and they've just repeated it. And they don't know anything more than what they've just seen. And so they don't even know that it doesn't apply in this way. I think those videos came from the sort of perspective that we see taught in pretty much every video I've seen. Comes from presentations for architects learning architecture, or maybe draftspeople doing drafting, people making plans and blueprints, because those boxes on the flat horizon with nothing around it, that's a great way of showcasing architecture to a client, of making the building the main thing, no distractions, simplifying the environment, the context. But life's not like that. And if you're on a halfway up a hill looking out over a city where the streets are going up and down, those boxes make no sense. Now, they do once you understand that, yeah, there's more to it than that. You know, the basic principles still work, but it's a more complex way that they work. But the problem is the videos don't tell you that they haven't told you. And it's natural enough that we think, well, the person making the video knows what they're on about. So if I can't make it work, I must be at fault. No, you're not at fault. They're bad videos. And this is one of the problems being a self-taught person watching YouTube, because not every video is as good as every other video. Not every teacher is as good as every other teacher. And every video won't be as good for you as it might be for someone else in a different place with different background experience. In exactly the same way as at high school, some of your teachers were better teachers than others. But then there were some teachers that some kids found really helpful and other kids found not very helpful, because an approach that from one teacher to some kids would work better, but not that same approach to others. So, you know, YouTube is the same. And if, you know, I need to critique not just my drawing, but the videos I watch. And if a video isn't helpful, if I don't get it, I shouldn't think that I'm necessarily the problem. I mean, it may just be that it's a bit too advanced for me, but it may simply be a bad video. And there's no judgment there, but I shouldn't linger with videos from a channel where they're not helping me and where they're possibly confusing me and making me feel less confident about drawing. You know, it's not a good match for me, that channel. It might be a great match for someone else, but it's not a good match for me. So, you know, I think it's, you know, I mean, we want to learn to draw, but we need to learn as well. Because while learning to draw is a skill, learning is a skill. And I think that's the big advantage I've had, and maybe why I've developed my drawing reasonably quickly, because as a trained teacher, although it wasn't in art, we do learn how we had to learn how we learn, so that we could tailor our teaching to the ways in which people learn. And I think I've had the benefit of that when I've navigated my drawing journey. I'm falling behind here. Okay, Maitri, welcome. Hi, this is an update and a question. I kept your advice about drawing a section of the extravagant facade and I drew the spire of Notre Dame. I'm really happy with that drawing. That's great. Was that the one that was a video of mine maybe 2 weeks ago, something like that? La Flèche. I say that's, I'm sure that's not how the French say it. But yeah, the one that burnt down. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you're happy with it. It's not an easy one because it's so sort of tall and elegant. If you'd have any advice for progressing to larger ink drawings, I'd be very grateful. Look, there are two ways you could do it. One is you could actually do something you've already done, such as the spire of Notre Dame, but do it larger, because there are different challenges for different scales, particularly where straight lines are involved. So simply doing it larger would push you. The other thing is if you had a reference photo and you just drew a small part of it, then draw that part again, but expand out a bit more. Or simply find a similar subject, but different, and do that in the sort of same size and scale and technique as the ones you've been doing, but simply pushing it into a different subject will demand, further kind of working out of what am I doing and how am I doing it, but not be totally new, but be new. Like we really don't learn if we stay in our comfort zone. We really don't learn if we draw the same thing the same way over and over again. It can be tempting, but it's not a good way to learn. If I just want the security of a nice drawing, it can be very tempting to, and look, if that's what I want, there's nothing wrong with it. But usually we want to keep developing our skills. And if these ramblings are all helpful, please hit the like button if you haven't. Yeah. Ian, seeing faces in stuff as pareidolia. Okay, there's a word for everything, isn't there? Yeah. Thanks, Randy. Really appreciate that. It's funny, I have all these. When I was actually a high school teacher, I had these classrooms full of kids who really didn't want to be in the same room as me, and now I have all these people over the world who think I'm a good teacher. I wish some of them could see me now. Me too. Sorry for the delay response about the guitar. Usually it's 3 chords you first learn. Aha. Oh, you're learning the guitar, are you? Me too. Right. Okay. 3 chords is the minimum for a song. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. But equally, it's 3 chords. And I bet you they're the 3 easiest chords. I bet you, and yeah. Wow. Thanks, Sanya. Lady Holman, US here, mid-Atlantic. I think, I see, like the middle of the Atlantic coast. I was thinking, you're on a boat in the mid-Atlantic. I think there is a generation that lacks a certain amount of patience. Either I'm an expert at things right now or I'm frustrated. Practice is key. Start small. Look, I think you're true. I think you're right. I think you're right, Lady Holman. I think there is a great impatience. I think there is a desire to start at the end and to get the benefits of being very good before we've become very good. And look, we can't help how we are. Like, our mindset comes from a lot of factors outside of our control, and it's partly the wider social context. I think it's the fact that I remember. Hang on. When I was in first, we called it first form. It's now called year 7 in Australia, but it's the first year of high school, which might be the first year of junior high in the States or in other parts of the world. But you're basically 12, turning 13 in this year. And I remember a teacher saying to us, warning us not to make the mistake of thinking if there were kids who never did any work and who always said how they hadn't done this and put no effort into that, and no, I'm not going to do that, not to believe them, but because they said they're the sort of kid who you don't know, but they encourage you all not to bother and to think it's cool to do no work and not to try. But they go home and do all the homework quietly and secretly, and they study really hard, and they still do very well, and you don't, because you didn't put the work in, because you didn't think they did. And you know, like our perception of what other people are doing and how hard it is. I think with social media, and look, I've got no problem with social media. I mean, it can be amazing. It's been an amazing experience, an amazing ride for me in lots of ways. But you know, when you see someone's work on social media, what you don't see is, you don't see, I guess, except in my videos, you don't see what it took them to do that particular artwork, but you also don't see the years, the decades of practice and practice and practice. We just see that they can do these really cool things that perhaps get them a lot of attention, maybe a lot of money, and we think, oh man, I want that. I want to do that. How do you do that? I want that now. I want that this week. So how can I get that? And I think that's why there's this great emphasis on hacks and shortcuts and tips and I think part of that, I mean, I've made a few videos lately with drawing, as he scratches the hair on his chinny chin chin. I've made a few videos lately that really talk about the fact that I believe that 95% of the success of the drawing happens before the pen hits the paper or the pencil or the paintbrush, whatever. Now, it's not 95% of the time, and that's the deceptive thing. But the problem is that in impatience to get a finished drawing that looks great, and in impatience, that means that I don't take time to understand the process. I start drawing before I really know what I'm drawing, and the finished drawing shows that. I start drawing before I've really worked out what am I trying to create? How am I, you know, I can't draw a photo. How am I going to want this to look? What changes are going to happen from this form of a two-dimensional image to the form I'm going to create? Or if it's in front of me, it's exactly the same thing. I can't draw the three-dimensional reality on the paper, so I have to translate it. Well, that partly depends on what I want my version to say. And I've got to spend the time to think about it. Now, for someone who's experienced, it doesn't necessarily take them long, but it doesn't take them long to work that out because they've spent 25 years learning how to do it and being able to knowing where to go exactly most of the time with that. But they still do it. But if you've never done that yourself, it's easy to think that that's not important or necessary, that I just want to get down to the actual drawing. Well, actually, if you don't know what you're doing, it'll show. And people think that is poor drawing technique. I don't think that the drawing technique skills, like the straight line, the curves, you know, those things, how to crosshatch, are that difficult. The difficult thing is knowing, what am I trying to create? Because that's what's going to tell me what line to put where, how, what marks to put, how to layer things, because I've worked out the visual effect I want my finished drawing to have, and that guides every move. People don't know where to put lines because they don't know what they're doing, because they haven't done that thinking beforehand. And as I said, I think 95% of the success of a good drawing comes from all of that. And the strategizing, where am I going to start? What's the most, for how I want my drawing to look at the end, and for the challenges of this subject, what's going to be the best thing? And the fact that I'm drawing freehand in ink and there's no eraser, how do I start? What's the best place, not to start a drawing, but for this drawing, what's the best place to start? What part will give me a really accurate starting point that I can then build from and build on. Give me a foundation. And then where do I go next, and what do I finish with? And I know when to finish, even by knowing what I'm trying to achieve, because when I've achieved it, I know to stop. But I'll overwork a drawing when I haven't actually, before I've started to draw, worked out exactly the effect I want. Knowing what I'm doing before I start guides every decision and every mark. And when people pick up the pen and they just rush to start drawing straight away, that's where all the problems come, because they're kind of guessing as they go. And that's the other problem when we copy other people's drawings. It's a different skill. It's a different skill to creating my own drawings. And so I can do that. And I can usually, for most people, end up with a far better drawing than I can draw myself, because it's basically an easier skill than to create my own original work. Because when I copy someone else's work, I don't have to do any of that thinking. They've done it already. I only have to copy them. I haven't got to work out what am I trying to create in my finished drawing. They did that. I haven't got to think about how will I translate this photo into marks. They've already done that. I just copied their marks. Now, there is some skill involved in that, and it's a skill that we can learn and develop, but we don't use those skills when we create our own original drawings. And that's why I've had so many people say to me, oh, I don't understand it. I copy someone else's drawing and it looks really great, but when I go to start my own drawing, I don't even know where to start. Well, that's why, because they're two different things, and for most people, it's really not helpful at all. And in this impatient age, the desire to get to the end quickly, it's even more tempting, because I can get a nice looking artwork more easily, but it won't take me to the place I want to go. That's the thing. It's a detour that goes in a different direction. And so the problem is, if I really do want to learn to do my own drawings, I'm just wasting time doing that. Okay. Yeah, practice is key. Start small. Look, but not just practice, it's considered practice. I can do the same unhelpful things over and over and over and over again, and I will just get very good at doing possibly something badly. And if I do it over and over and over and over again, wrongly, unhelpfully, I may actually over time lose the ability to see what I should be doing. I may end up getting so used to seeing something look like this that I actually can't see how it should look. So this again is why critiquing, honest critiquing, is so important. And at times getting someone else to do it for me. Does this look right to you? Can you see any problems with this? Tell me. You won't hurt my feelings. If I haven't got a teacher to mark my work, I have to mark my own work. But I can get friends who I give permission to be ruthlessly unkind and tell me if there's parts that don't look right. It doesn't kind of work, because that gives us a focus. When the teacher marks my work and I see what I got wrong or what was only partly right, well, now I know what I need to study next time if I want to pass next time. So, yep. The Apopheniac, thank you. It was trying to get a better understanding of it. That's great. Mike Tree, yes, it was La Flèche, the reference pick. Yep. So you could just draw it larger, or you could draw. There wasn't that much more in that photo to draw. Yeah. XD, greetings from Poland. Greetings, Poland. All those S's and Z's and K's and R's. It's always, as an English speaker, it's always incredible to look at written Polish, where it just seems to have like almost no vowels. Yeah. I had a friend who like years ago, back in the 80s, he was doing a course at uni, and he decided to do an introduction to Polish course because he thought that would be fun. and he dropped out after 3 weeks because he said, "Oh, it's so hard, Stephen. It's no fun at all. It's so hard. I can't say anything. I can't." So, yeah, but yeah, obviously you speak English, so thank you, because I don't think I could learn Polish. Um, Mid-Atlantic is basically Maryland, Virginia, DC, Delaware. Oh, right, okay. It's actually a known description. Hi there, Lee. An hour and a half in. Yep. Oh well. If you have any drawing problem issues you want to bring up, now's the time. Bogdan. Hi, Stephen. I would like to ask, what should I do to make my drawings look more realistic? I can say I'm pretty good at drawing the object with realistic proportions, but my problem is hatching real. Tolkien gave up on Polish. Goodness, he used to make up his own languages and scripts and everything. That says something. We actually have a Polish lady who lives in our street, and she's an older lady, and she's married to a Chilean. So yeah. I enjoyed talking about language with them as an ex-English teacher. I find language and how it's. I loved linguistics at university. I could have done a linguistics major. I just love studying the way languages work. Not any one language, but just the way languages work. Yeah. But gosh, yeah. But Bogdan, make drawings look more realistic. Look, it kind of depends. This is where it's a little bit hard without seeing your work. And please, I'm not asking you to send it to me. But when I look at drawings that I think don't look real, what I think is the biggest problem is the line work. Not that it's not accurate or not necessarily inaccurate, but that it's all the same. Again, I've a couple of my recent videos, I've compared drawings I did 2 years ago with drawings I do now, and just reflecting on the change in my style. And I think what I had a couple of years ago when I first started, or you could just go back and look at my first videos, 1,000 videos ago, the line work is accurate, but it's all the same. It's all these heavy, fairly straight, sharp lines. I think because I was focusing on accuracy. What happened though, once I began to be able to take the accuracy for granted, that I worked out how to observe and to, so that wasn't absorbing all my energy and attention. What I began to do was to I began to think more of capturing a certain effects. And again, I think it comes back to my leaves on trees and painting the effect of detail, not the detail. And at some point, the light bulb moment, and if you're here listening to this, this is worth paying for, was that I realized that with everything I draw, I'm drawing the effect. It's not just when I draw overwhelming detail like grass or leaves on a tree, where you can't draw every bit of detail, and therefore you have to create the effect that we see, the visual effect that in fact it's the same for everything. And drawing black heavy lines around everything to create shapes and define form and silhouette, that's not the visual effect of everything in a scene. It may not be the visual effect of anything in a scene. And if you look at some of my, I've done a couple of drawings lately which have a lot of hatching in them. So hatching is great for this, but a lot of bush scenes where there is a lot of overwhelming detail, where there are very few what you'd call lines, like lines that aren't just a few millimeters long of tiny hatching. because I'm not trying to draw objects, I'm trying to capture effects. And the effects involves the shape. It involves sometimes individual shapes, sometimes collective shapes, such as a tree canopy, but it also involves the light effects. Is it in light or dark? It involves the shape of the surface and the texture. I get worried though when people talk about drawing textures, because what that usually means when I look at their work is patterns. And no, I don't want to draw patterns, because patterns are really just symbols for something that's too hard to draw. I want to still capture visually the feel in some way of what I'm looking at. And if you look at my more recent drawings, I think that they do show that. And I'm not just talking about trees and bush scenes. I'm talking about brick buildings. I'm talking about streetscapes. When I look at a streetscape, I don't see all the detail. It's depth of plane. When in life, I see things further away with a different effect than if they're close to me. So how do I capture that? And this is where, again, this is part of the 95% of the end result that comes from before I put the pen on the paper, because I look at my reference and I'm thinking, well, how do I achieve this? What am I trying to achieve? What parts of this, when I look at this photo, if I imagine looking at this in life, what parts of this are going to be prominent, clearer? What parts are more peripheral? What parts are further away? And visually, what different effect does this create? And how can I capture this effect in my drawing? Because even if it's the same object, if one is further away, the visual effect of that in life is different to if it's closer. So I want my two things, whether they're trees or buildings or people, to capture not just the outline, the shape, the proportions, but the visual effect of where they are in the context of the overall drawing, the overall scene. Does this make sense? And this is part of the 95% of the success of a drawing that happens because I plan it in my head using my eyes with the reference, but in my head, so that I know what I want, if you like, my translation to say. And then I can work out how am I going to translate this, that, using whatever, pencil, pen, paint, onto my paper. I'm not copying shapes. And can I say, I mean, and again, this is, I honestly keep, I keep kind of, I keep developing different ways of thinking about all of this. But one of my latest epiphany moments is that so much of the time we think that hatching is simply to create shadow and shade. No, hatching's a way we create effect. And I've done a number of forest and woodland and bush scenes where I could not have drawn them with lines, except hatching lines, where almost everything in the scene is just light and dark values created by hatching. And to my mind, amazing effects. And I'm not saying that with any arrogance. I'm just amazed at that you can create these effects. And I get quite excited about those. And I'm doing more of them now because I guess they interest me. And I'm pushing myself when I do them. For me, it's kind of pushing into new territory. But it's made me realize hatching is so much more than putting shade and shadow on. And when people say, well, tell me how to hatch, what direction do I put the hatching on? What direction do I do the lines? I feel like, yeah, it's like it's the wrong way of thinking. The question is always, what effect am I wanting to create? And now that includes shade and shadow, and they're two different things. Okay, I have a video on that. One of the 1,000 and whatever. But it's more than that. It's how we create things, because when I outline everything, it ends up looking cartoon-like, because you only have a heavy outline around things in cartoons. and usually a simplified outline in cartoons, because there's only so much we can draw in outline before there just isn't room to put any more detail. But if I'm not drawing the detail, if I'm drawing the effect of the detail, I can make it way more detailed, ironically, and complex by not drawing at all. And I didn't even realize I was drawing this way, except in my big Instagram drawings, which I used to do, which weren't freehand. I used to grid the photo 4x4 and my paper 4x4, and I did a pencil underlining and under drawing, and then I inked over that, and then I erased it all, the pencil, and then I put the sketch marker over the top. But I'd often get comments like, "Oh, I can't believe your detail." But when I zoomed in, it wasn't there. And it made me think, okay, what's happening that it's not there, but it looks like it's there? And that let me put into words what I'd intuitively been doing. And it's really been, I think, the genesis of all of my drawing development, that no, I'm not, when I draw, I'm not drawing objects. I'm not capturing objects. I'm creating a visual effect that sometimes an outline represents that visual effect on my reference or in front of me well, but so much of the time it doesn't. So yeah, if that makes sense. But I think so think, Bogdan, thinking less. I was just thinking, why am I going on about this? I was just, I saw answering Bogdan. And I guess the mental picture I've got of your drawings from what you've said is a bit like how my drawings looked a couple of years ago, where the line work is accurate, but it just doesn't look real. And it's because the line work being accurate was still insufficient for capturing the feel. And it's really the feel of the subject we want to capture. And accuracy is a part of that, but there's more to it than that. I don't know, Bogdan, how much of my work you've looked at, but if you go right back to my first architecture drawings, and it's like 2.5 years ago, I think it's August, July or August 2 years ago. What's that, 2022? And look at those drawings and compare them to the drawings, particularly the forest and bushlands drawings that I've done lately. That's what I'm talking. It's the difference between those two drawings, those two types of drawings, that I think is the difference between perhaps where you're at and where you'd like to go. So, just a thought anyway. Maitri is saying, Stephen, I'm starting a sign language linguistics bachelor. Wow, good on you. That's great. I just love linguistics. I remember I did like introduction to, I did an English major and a history major, ancient history major. And introduction to linguistics was just kind of like a little extra subject I did. And I loved it so much that I did at least one linguistic subject every year. And I remember thinking, man, I could have done it. I mean, it wasn't a good subject, wouldn't have been a good major for being an English teacher. It was a bit too narrow, but I certainly would have enjoyed spending my whole degree on that, phonemes and morphemes, and it was really interesting. And looking at a smattering of dozens of different languages, European, African, it was just so interesting. Tolkien giving up on the Polish language gives me a newfound fear or respect for the language. Yeah. About markers from Lee. I know you don't say your name, Lee, with L-E, with the, I don't even know what that's, not a circumflex. I'm afraid I don't know how it changes the vowel sound, though. About markers, are there ways to draw the vegetations? When I draw mountains or forests, they just look flat, unlike pens. There may be a word not quite right there. But look, Lee, I've got one video that's maybe 6 months ago of a mountain. It's a Swiss mountain, and look, it's probably in the playlist, Drawing the Effect of Detail. But if it's not, if you just scroll back, there's a big mountain on the right-hand side, and there's a fir tree, a black sort of silhouetted fir tree on the left-hand side, sort of the lower half. And it's the only mountain I've drawn where the mountain was the main subject. And it was the first time I kind of applied, it's the only time I've really applied my way of thinking now about creating the effect and trying to capture the effect and using hatching. It's the only time I've applied it to a mountain where, as I said, the mountain was still although it was very far away, it was the main subject. And I was really happy with how it worked. So if you could find that, but the other thing is, and again, you see, this is where it's hard just talking and not being able to show drawings and stuff. But a big mistake is when we rush to do an outline. And so if I have a mountain that's in the background, which, I mean, I do a reasonable amount of scenery things and landscapes and things. And certainly where there's like the horizon mountain that's sort of silhouetted in the distance, if there is one, I would never, ever just draw that line. I would always do a series of often very short lines, sometimes with little gaps or longer gaps between, and sometimes a little bit heavier with the line. But if it's far away, generally very light, because I don't want a big heavy black outline, because that's not the effect when I see a distant mountain, ridge line, whatever. The effect is always something lighter and more tenuous. So I don't want to draw a fat, heavy line. I want to create the effect of that light, tenuous, the fact that maybe some parts of the silhouette edge are actually maybe sharp and catching the light very, very directly. Perhaps other parts, though, are weathered and are even rolling around away from me, which creates a much softer feel. And it can vary from part to part. And so I can't capture that if I haven't seen it. And this is why I keep saying, 95% of a good drawing happens before the pen hits the paper. It's just that it's not 95% of the time. It might be at the start, but you can develop the skill of seeing things and learning what to look for so that it becomes a lot quicker with practice. But yeah, I mean, again, I often see big, heavy lines for mountain ranges at the back, and it makes them come close and it makes them look very unnatural. It's always what marks will create the effect I'm after. And it's why I've stopped talking about drawing with lines and I've started talking about drawing with effects, with marks, because marks are a lot more variable. There's many more options with marks, and lines are marks. So lines are some of the marks that we have within our option to use. But talking marks, thinking marks, just slows me down actually putting the ink on paper until I've thought more about what combination of marks will create the effect of a mountain far away, not a mountain, but this mountain with this distance, with these formations of its edge, instead of making it look like I've cut out a sheet of cardboard and just stuck it on the paper so there's just a solid edge that's all no, because I'm looking at a three-dimensional thing and the edges are different. I guess the other thing I'm really focused on now at the moment is edges. Very few edges are, regardless of how close or far away, are accurately captured, effectively captured by a straight line, by a solid line. Now, if it's a cut, polished marble block with straight, smooth edges that meet perfectly, then maybe straight lines, or it's a polished brass cube or something, then maybe straight lines does capture that effect well. But probably even then, not the same heaviness of lines. I mean, the closer lines might be darker, and the ones further away where we're looking past the edge, not at the edge, maybe they should be lighter and finer, and vary in either the weight of line we draw with our pen or using different pens. With a pencil, it's easier because you can kind of just vary the pressure. It's a wonderful thing with graphite, is the variability in the marks we make just by pressure and angle. But with pens, sometimes changing the pen. So I always have 2 or 3 or 4 pens of the same brand. Use the same brand, doesn't matter what it is, but use the same brand, because that way the lines all look the same, the ink color is the same, and so forth, if that makes sense. I'm glad that was helpful, Bogdan. Akia, hi, how are you? Me too. Sign language I was learning at school due to circumstances beyond my control. Never got to complete it. But yeah, well, I know that. But no, it's a great thing to be able to learn. And yeah, well, it's not too late. Me too. It's not too late. I'm sure there's somewhere around where you live where you could actually, study that, even if it's a sort of a correspondence thing. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't somewhere. It's never too late to learn. That's good to hear. Me too. To know, are we learning NGT, sign language of the Netherlands? Right. Okay. Yeah. I guess it. I hadn't thought about that, but I guess it. I don't know. Does every language have its own sign-in, or is there kind of like the language may change, but the signage then for that meaning stays the same? I don't know. I haven't thought about it. Probably harder than Auslan. Yep. Okay. So you've looked at that, right? Oh well. Yeah. Okay. Oh gosh, it's a minute. 4 minutes to go. Have I been going on for 2 hours? My wife doesn't believe I can go on for so long. Well, actually, she partly can, but I think she finds it harder to believe that anyone would want to listen. She's gone to bed now. Every sign language is different. Right. Okay. I've never actually thought that out. I mean, I've watched it often enough, but always in English. I've never thought about sign language with other languages. Thank you for that. Are there any more questions or things that anyone wants to say? Please hit the like button if you haven't hit it already, and that would be great. Have people seen my I've begun to do a series of shorts, and I'm up to I posted number 17. They're drawing tips. They're you might find this hard to believe, but they're 15 to 30 seconds each. No more than 30 seconds, and some of them are closer to 15 seconds of random drawing tips. So if you've watched all my videos, you'd have heard them all. But I know people haven't watched all my videos. So and I have put them all on a playlist. So if you want to just binge on all the shorts, they're all good tips. Some of them are the sort of things I've been saying here, but where helpful, they're illustrated with drawings, depending what they are. So why not check out that playlist, my shorts playlist, and just binge it? And if you know someone who draws, send them a link to the playlist, and they can just have a watch through those. And and if you like them and whatnot, leave a comment. Then probably the algorithm will show you the new ones when they come. So I've decided they're because they don't really take very long to do, given they're 15 seconds. Every part of the process is fairly quick. They're quite good when I don't really have time to do a drawing or a video. So now, some of you may be aware that I've been planning to do my time a Sunday night and then redo the same topic on my Thursday morning. And the idea is that the Thursday morning, my time, is a better time zone for the Americas than this one, which I think is probably more helpful for people in Europe. But I'm not going to be able to do it this week, and I probably won't be free next Sunday night. So it might be a week before I do another live session, but I will try and make sure I post on my community page when I have a live session coming up. But I am trying to make it a routine, scheduling, as long as I can keep thinking of things to say. There are sign languages which have borrowed lexicon from spoken languages through fingerspelling or mouthing the words. Sign languages can also form their own words. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like you've done a bit of your course already. That's great. Okay. So if again, please hit the like button if you haven't already. If you missed, I found a bunch of drawings I did when I was 16 that I was showing you earlier. I'll just you can see what I was interested in when I was. That's not a bad one. That might be one of the later ones I did when I was. This is what I was. I have got a couple more of these, and they're ones that I gave the lady who's now my wife, when she was a friend at school. I gave her when I was 15, and she kept them and found them in the front of a hardcover book not long ago, and she gave them back. Well, didn't give them back to me, but yeah, I've got them now. But I came across these that I did when I was 15. So I think that's the Bismarck, actually. Yeah, so look, I did do some drawing when I was young, and that's what I was drawing as a 16-year-old. So yeah, and then there was just a long time in between, and I began drawing Paris rather than battleships. Yeah. So look, I guess that winds things up for now. So like button, please, if you're one of the 20 who are still here right now and haven't hit like. That would be helpful. I painted the Titanic. I don't know what happened to that painting. I don't know that I've actually drawn a proper drawing of the Titanic. I was a Titanic buff as a kid. So yeah, and I still am. Still very interested. I've watched the second half of the Titanic movie a lot, from when it hits the iceberg. Yeah. All right. Look, thanks for joining, everyone. I hope the things I've said have been helpful for the people who ask questions. And if you didn't ask questions, then I hope that some of those things are still being helpful. Oh, it's a sad story what happened to the Model Me Too. When I was moving house, I at one stage I gave it to my parents to look after for me, and then I forgot about it. And then when they moved house, it got chucked in the bin, and it got jammed in the bin, and everything was ripped off it. And I actually was asked to go around and clear all that rubbish, and I found it in the bin, and I have it, and I kept it all, and I keep thinking I'll repair it one day. So it's a bit sad. I was so proud of it. I thought it looked so good when I did it. It was in the late 70s. I was probably about 20 when I made it. It was a kit. I didn't like, but still I painted it nicely. My pleasure, Sandhya. Okay, thank you, everyone. So look, hope this has been helpful. Keep drawing, and whatever you end up drawing, and whatever problems you do or don't have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.